On this Wednesday night, a desperate mission off Nova Scotia.
Hard-working men just wanting to make a living and get back home.
The search for missing scallop fishers is suspended. Activating emergency plans, Ontario's hospitals told to prepare for even more COVID patients. Plus, the Alberta baby who got the virus when she was just a few days old and ended up on a ventilator.
That was the scariest moment of my life.
Record-breaking bust in Toronto, the street value of this massive seizure of drugs and guns. And to the moon. A Canadian is going where no Canadian has gone before.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. We know families across this country are enduring so much uncertainty because of COVID-19, and now several families in Nova Scotia have an added agonizing burden. The search for missing crew members on board a scallop fishing boat that went down in the Bay of Fundy has now been suspended. 6 men were on board. The body of one of them has been recovered. Anyone who fishes for a living knows it is a risky business, but hearing bad news like this never gets any easier. Ross Lord is in Digby, Nova Scotia tonight. Ross?
Well, Donna, despite a second day of searching these waters, the search has now been suspended with no indication anyone survived. The company that owns the Chief William Solace says there appears to have been an unknown event that caused the vessel to capsize. And the company notes that no distress call is known to have been made. The RCMP is now taking over, hoping to recover the bodies of the 5 other crew members. Ground search and rescue teams inspect the shoreline near the site of tragedy. Volunteers braving the same bitter cold and vicious winds as the scallop fishers whose boat went down early Tuesday morning. They're factoring in the Bay of Fundy's fast-rushing tides as they look for evidence.
To continue looking for articles of, could be vessel pieces, any rescue equipment, anything that would indicate the vessel's name.
On Tuesday, searchers found 2 empty life rafts, the body of one scallop harvester, and some clothing. The other 5 fishers from the Chief William Solace are still missing. Military aircraft are helping with the search, a grim ritual when tragedies happen in fishing communities. A terrible trade-off for a Nova Scotia seafood industry worth billions of dollars a year. Along with lobster, the world-famous Digby scallops are a big part of that industry.
A harsh reminder of the dangers that our guys go through, every day when they go out fishing.
If they don't go out, they don't get paid, as 30-year scallop fisher Kim Emino knows all too well. Emino knows some of the crew members of the missing boat and its captain, Charles Roberts. He says they typically fish for up to a week at a time, returning to Digby when they've caught enough to make their living.
Hard-working men just wanting to make a living and get back home.
The Chief William Solace was reportedly carrying a full load of scallops. When Emino heard the boat's emergency beacon had gone off, he went out alone to look for survivors, ignoring the treacherous conditions.
You don't think about that when you're thinking about your buddies out there floating, waiting for somebody to come get them, right? I would expect somebody to come look for me, right?
What are you thinking about now?
What I was thinking about just now was about the families that have to think about where their loved ones are and how they're going to get by without them.
The timing of this is especially cruel in a year already filled with horrific tragedy in Nova Scotia and after one of the crew's final catches before Christmas. Donna?
All right, Ross Lord, thanks. The search for a Canadian Forces member missing off the coast of California has now ended. Master sailor Dwayne Earle is believed to have accidentally fallen overboard the Navy frigate HMCS Winnipeg early Monday. His absence wasn't noticed until later that morning. The vessel turned back to help in the search about 1,000 kilometers off San Francisco. Earle spent more than 30 years in the Canadian Forces. Now to the vaccine rollout. More Canadians are getting a shot in the arm.
Take a deep breath in. We're going to blow it out.
This is Nova Scotia's first person to get vaccinated. Danielle Sheaves is a registered nurse. She works in a COVID unit at a Halifax area hospital. She was one of about 390 Nova Scotia healthcare workers to be vaccinated today.
I was honored to be asked to be the first person to get the vaccine this morning. I think this is one of the only ways that we're going to get back to some semblance of a normal life and will protect the public, our patients, everybody. So I think everyone should get the vaccine.
Rollout of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine is now underway in nearly every province in Canada. Along with Nova Scotia, PEI, Newfoundland and Labrador, and Manitoba also administered their first shots today. New Brunswick is expected to begin rollout this weekend. The territories are waiting for approval of the Moderna vaccine, which is easier to transport. In Ontario, vaccinations are ramping up for priority groups, but it's too late for people getting sick now. Public health officials warn the situation remains extremely volatile. More than 2,000 new cases were reported in Ontario today for the second day in a row. 43 more Ontarians have died. That pushed the province past a grim new milestone. More than 4,000 people in Ontario have now died of COVID-19. Hospitalizations are climbing too. 932 people are in the hospital in Ontario, 256 of them in ICU. Toronto Public Health says the restrictions are not working to stop the spread and more needs to be done. Ontario hospitals already over capacity are being told to activate emergency plans to clear beds for a surge in more COVID-19 patients. Abigail Bimman reports.
The message to the public is the same as it would have been, just even louder, to say that there's real strain on the system.
At Toronto's Humber River Hospital, COVID-19 patients fill close to half of the ICU. Bracing for a further surge, they're making space however they can.
In the acute care centre, also looking at unconventional spaces to surge into.
This memo from Ontario Health to all hospital CEOs in the province calls for those in the hardest hit areas, grey and red levels, to ensure at least 10 to 15% surge capacity for COVID-19 patients within 48 hours. The rest of the province is asked to plan for the same thing.
We've adopted this dimmer switch model. So we want to dim down elective procedures and surgeries and other kinds of care that can safely be deferred, not canceled, but deferred, but do as much of that work as we possibly can.
At St. Joseph's Healthcare in Hamilton, they're still deciding whether to defer elective and non-urgent surgeries, but they're confident they can hit the 15% bed increase target, in part through a satellite site set up at a hotel.
By the end of the day tomorrow, 30 additional patients will have been moved, so that will be very helpful. We also have a natural slowdown of surgical volumes over the Christmas break.
A Christmas slowdown is common across the board, but so is the fear about what will happen in January.
Unless we behave during the holidays, we are going to crumble the system, and the 10 and 15% of the beds will not even help.
Many hospitals are asking staff to consider canceling vacations over the coming weeks. Meanwhile, the Ontario Hospital Association held an emergency board meeting to discuss the potential surge in hospitalizations. The group calls it a, quote, far more serious situation than the first wave, but declined multiple interview requests to discuss the state of things. Abigail Bimman, Global News, Ottawa.
In Alberta, the government is preparing for more patients. It's working with the Red Cross now to set up a field hospital at the University of Alberta's Butterdome.
It will take a few weeks to set up the care centre, which could add an additional 100 inpatient beds. This is a purely precautionary measure for use if needed in the future.
Right now, there are 749 Albertans in the hospital with COVID-19. 139 of them are in intensive care. The youngest to end up in intensive care in Alberta has been a newborn baby. Nora Forrest almost didn't make it. It is rare for children to get seriously ill from the virus, but it does happen. And for Nora's parents, who themselves got COVID-19, it was agonizing. Heather Yourex-West has their story.
It's okay, baby. It's okay, Nora.
At 4 days old, Nora Forrest cries but cannot make a sound. Her tiny body relying on life support, all because of COVID-19.
That was the scariest moment of my life.
She was born full term on November 22nd at Calgary's Rocky View Hospital. Her parents had taken every precaution to avoid the virus. But 36 hours after bringing Nora home, her mom Jada Forrest realized she was sick.
And then I woke up with symptoms. So I had like a little bit fever, but a runny nose, and I literally felt like a train just hit me.
Within days, the whole family had symptoms. Father Ben came next, then big sister Hazel, even Jada's mom, who lives in the home too.
We all were getting sick, and we all thought, oh, hopefully the baby doesn't get the cold, because we thought it's flu or cold.
But Nora did get sick, spiking a fever so high that her parents were told to get to hospital right away.
So they rushed it, and suddenly like 10 people showed up in the room, and they're poking her, checking everything, asking what's going on. And then she stopped breathing. We thought that we probably will not be able to bring her home. We're going to bring an empty car seat, which was, like when you see the car seat, it's a constant reminder that, that might be empty. And then that was really hard.
Most kids who get COVID do not get very sick at all. But while severe illness is uncommon, it is not impossible. And there have been hundreds of cases in Canada where kids have been hospitalized because of COVID-19.
We've had 0 deaths in children in Alberta. There have been just a small single-digit number, a handful of deaths in children across Canada. But definitely young infants are one group where there's the risk of ending up in an intensive care unit and then potentially longer-term consequences of COVID-19.
Can you say hi, Heather?
Say hi. Hi. Hi, Heather.
Nora's story has a happy ending. After almost 2 weeks in hospital, the Forests were able to bring their daughter home.
And Hazel loves her. She constantly tries to feed her and then give her kisses.
But the experience has given the family a new perspective, knowing how close they came to losing someone so precious to COVID-19. Heather, Yourex-West, Global News, Calgary.
A huge bust by Toronto police coming up, the massive amount of firearms and drugs seized in one apartment. Plus, the Prime Minister reflects on 2020 and what next year might bring. This is the biggest seizure of guns and drugs in a single day by Toronto police. 57 handguns, 8 long guns, including an Uzi, and 15,000 rounds of ammunition, plus cocaine, crystal meth, and fentanyl. Police say it has a street value of more than $18 million. It was all found in a Toronto man's apartment. Police say he had no previous history of drugs or firearms offenses. He now faces 78 charges. The pandemic has been a huge test for political leaders around the world. Our Ottawa Bureau Chief Mercedes Stephenson interviewed Canada's Prime Minister to reflect on 2020. Mercedes, one of the topics you touched on is the fate of the two Michaels, the two Canadians who have endured more than 2 years of captivity now in Chinese prisons. What did the Prime Minister say?
Donna, what the Prime Minister said caught my attention, and it surprised me a bit. He seemed to take a more positive tone than what we've heard from the government in the past. When I asked if there might be hopeful news for the families of Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor before the new year arrives.
Certainly hope so. We have been working from the very beginning on this. This will be their third Christmas in arbitrary detention in China, and what their families have gone through is just horrific. What they've gone through with an amazing amount of resilience.
So, is something brewing behind the scenes? Well, earlier this month, an unconfirmed report said the U.S. Justice Department may be cutting a deal with Meng Wanzhou's lawyers that could see her return to China. That raised hopes, and Canadian officials have long believed the two Michaels were detained as retaliation for her arrest. So if she returns home, perhaps that could be the trigger point to begin the release of the two Canadians.
And Mercedes, 2021 will bring new leadership to the U.S., but it won't all be smooth sailing. Trudeau and President-elect Joe Biden don't agree on the Keystone XL pipeline, for one thing. Is there a clash coming on that?
Well, it could be the first serious disagreement the two leaders face. Biden has promised very clearly to cancel Keystone XL, and he has surrounded himself with key administration figures who share that view. But the Prime Minister is hoping to change their minds, even if it means asking Biden to break a major electoral promise.
I've been making that argument to American Democrats and to people in general for the past 7 years, that the Keystone is an integral part of Canada and America's energy security, and it's an argument I will continue to make. It's a conversation I had in my very first chat with President-elect Biden as President-elect, and we'll continue working together.
It's been quite a year, Mercedes. How did the Prime Minister sum up 2020?
A difficult year to be sure, Donna, but the Prime Minister said Canadians came together, and he's proud of how his government's performed. But like most of us, he can't wait for it to end. Here's how he wished us a Happy New Year.
Oh, yeah, going hard.
And I think that's the most enthusiastic thumbs up I've seen from the Prime Minister in some time.
All right, Mercedes Stevenson in Ottawa, thanks. You can watch the full interview with the Prime Minister on Christmas Day on Global. Ahead, Alberta's dilemma over orphaned wells deepens during the pandemic. Tens of thousands of inactive oil and gas wells dot the Alberta landscape, and there's concern many of them will be abandoned by companies that own them. As investigative reporter Julia Wong reports, the pandemic appears to have made a long-standing problem even worse.
There are 17 pipelines, a couple pump jacks, and 2 inactive wells on this Alberta property. Oil and gas has been here for decades, almost as long as Verna and Brian Phippin's family. But over the years, the blowouts, corrosion, and spills have taken a toll.
As things happen more and more and more, I begin to hate it. I begin to hate the petroleum industry.
There are now close to 100,000 inactive wells in Alberta, up more than 10% from last year, and a jump of more than 25% from just 4 years ago. And the COVID-19 pandemic may be making things worse. Global News obtained this presentation to the Alberta Energy Regulator Board through a Freedom of Information request. It notes many operators are shutting down production, some will likely not ever be able to restart, and some are not following proper suspension and decommissioning procedures.
We're always worried about bigger issues, leaks, and general environmental contamination.
The Orphaned Well Association is funded by industry and is supposed to look after wells left behind. Governments have also chipped in.
We do feel like we're well situated to deal with this issue, at least here for the short term.
The last few weeks, the regulator identified 86 companies that failed to pay into the industry cleanup fund. It says some later made payments. Experts say if more companies go under,
the public will have to pony up, or the levy on continuing oil and gas producers would have to be dramatically increased.
We're very near that worst case scenario.
The Alberta government says it's exploring new rules to ensure companies can afford to pay for cleanup before they drill. It will also set new mandatory targets to reduce the number of inactive wells and allow landowners to recommend where industry should start.
We could see some potential for some further companies falling into insolvency. So we put the tools in place. And again, this is something that previous governments never did.
You get into this business knowing exactly what those obligations are. We do have a few defaulting companies that are unable to discharge those.
Harold says defaulting companies are in the minority and there are safety nets for them. But for the Phippin family, the changes are coming too late.
Who's going to look after us? Nobody is. Nobody's looking after us.
Julia Wong, Global News, Edmonton.
Part of the transition to clean energy is hydrogen, an emissions-free fuel that can be produced from a variety of resources, including natural gas. And today the federal government unveiled its hydrogen strategy. It's investing $1.5 billion to develop a hydrogen fuel industry. It claims hydrogen could cut greenhouse gas emissions by up to 45 million metric tons per year by 2030, and it could create up to 350,000 jobs by 2050. The plan suggests setting up several regional hubs across the country where hydrogen fits local needs or expertise already exists. Natural Resources Minister Seamus O'Regan says the program is a key part of Canada's goal to reach net zero carbon emissions by 2050.
This strategy provides a challenge to all of us to make Canada the top producer of low carbon hydrogen in the world.
The federal government estimates the global hydrogen market could reach nearly $12 trillion by 2050. Houston, we have a Canadian next. NASA includes Canada in the next lunar mission.
Going to the moon to stay by 2024. And this is how.
This all starts with when NASA produced this video about its new mission to the moon, it made sense to have Canadian actor William Shatner narrate it. But this new mission is not fiction. It is real, and Canadians are going to play a big part in it. Mike Armstrong on Canada's role in the Lunar Gateway.
It has been 48 years this week since humans last went to the moon. This was Apollo 17 leaving the lunar surface.
Jessica Watkins.
Well, NASA unveiled its astronaut team last week that'll head back to the moon as part of the Artemis missions. The Canadian Space Agency's announcement Tuesday was considerably less flashy.
Merci, Lisa.
It was over a Zoom call, but no less important. The next NASA mission to the moon will have an astronaut with a Canadian flag on his or her shoulder.
Canada will join the U.S. on the first crewed mission to the moon since the Apollo missions.
Launching east from Kennedy Space Center.
Now, that first mission, set for 2023, won't land on the lunar surface. Artemis 2's 10-day flight will orbit the moon, testing procedures and equipment for later missions that will land. But it would make Canada only the second country to have an astronaut ever have this view, looking back at Earth.
Yeah, to be honest, I'm totally blown away by this announcement.
Gordon Ozinski is the director of Western University's Institute for Earth and Space Exploration. He says the ticket Canada punched is not one he or many other observers expected.
Many of us were thinking that, the first few missions, including Artemis 2, which is where the Canadian was selected, would be just all US astronauts.
Canada's seat on that trip, and another later down the road, come in return for its contribution to the Lunar Gateway. It's an international collaboration led by the US to set up a space station in orbit around the moon. Canada's contributing a Canadarm3.
I mean, there's definitely a lot of work to be done.
Now, it hasn't been decided which of Canada's 4 active astronauts will be in the seat that heads to the moon, but if you consider 2 of them only graduated from astronaut school this year, and one has already been to space, the odds are with Jeremy Hansen, waiting 11 years and counting.
Well, it's one of those things, like I don't know at this point.
On top of everything else it takes to be an astronaut, patience is another. Mike Armstrong, Global News, Montreal.
And that is Global National for this Wednesday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada is Petty Harbour, Newfoundland and Labrador. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you here again tomorrow. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.